Hello guys!
In this new series we are going to bring to life a Tamarin Monkey.
We will start with building up the character fur in Yeti, to later jump in new uncharted territories for Grooming, Unreal Engine 5.
Yeah, but first let's go find some references. We found a local natural park with some interesting animals, including a Tamarin Monkey. It's time to plan the groom work. As we can see, this monkey has different kind of fur, from quite long, like in this stylish mohawk, to short all around the face. We're going to split the fur in different sections in the Yeti graph to have more control in creating them. The first partition we're going to work on is the body. It's an area with mid-length fur. We'll also work on the fur in the neck, creating this nice transition between head and body. Then, we'll also work on the mohawk, the most characteristic feature of this monkey. For the face, we'll have different partitions, one for the main facial fur, another one for the peach fuzz, that is the thin fur all around the face. We'll also have a separate groom for the face details, like the whiskers and the long single hairs in the eyebrows.
So before to start the work in Maya and Yeti, we quickly jump in Substance Painter to paint our groom texture. The first one is going to be the density map. So this texture is going to control the placement of the fur. So in this part that has a light gray, there is going to be more fur compared to this area where we have a darker value. And this is good to create a nice transition. In fact, in this area we are going to see a bit of the skin. So we are not going to need the full amount of density we need in the body. So we are now in Maya, the place where we are going to build our groom work. So to do that, we select the model and in the Yeti tab, we click Create Yeti Node Mesh. By selecting the Yeti node in the outliner, we are going to be able to create in the Yeti graph, this section here, different nodes. Each one of these nodes will characterize and add more feature in our groom work. So the first node we want to create is the import node. We click here in the import node and we select the mesh. In this way the mesh, the model, is connected to our Yeti graph. After that we create the scatter node and we activate it, clicking this button here. And we can see that there are a lot of points all around the model. And each one of these single points will later grow in a single hair. So by clicking the scatter node we can add more density, using the density multiplier, and of course we can add an hider value here to add more density. But as we can see, the hair are going all over the model and we don't want that. We previously created a texture that controls the placement of the hair. So let's use that. So we create a new texture node and we double click on it, and here in the file we can put its full path, but there is a clever way to do that. So in the image search path, we are going to set the path of our folder where we placed all the groom texture that are going to control the groom in the graph. So by just doing that, in the texture node, we are going to just need to write the actual name of the texture and not the full path. So in this case, body, then .png. And this is of course going to be applied in all the texture node in the graph, so that's quite handy. Another thing you have to do in the v-coordinate is to set this expression that is basically going to let align the UV coordinates of the texture in the same way of the UVs of this model. And this expression is going to be useful also if you work with a model with multiple UDIMs. So the next step is to connect the texture node in the scatter node, and we just select the density here. And by doing that, let's refresh the density multiplier. We can see that the points are scattered only in the area where we paint white or gray in the texture, so that's quite useful. After the scatter node, we create the grow node. So with the grow node, each one of these points is going to become a nice hair. Of course, for now, we don't have any flow and length information, so it's like all the same. But we can already explore a bit the grow node. So in the grow node, if we select it, we can see that there are different parameters. The parameters that we use most is the minimum length. So if we see the minimum length is going to set the minimum length of the hair, and this way all the hair are not going to have the same length. That is quite a normal things we have in nature or in a groom work. So it's already better if we set it to like 0.7. So how we do control the grow node and adding the right length and as well the flow of the fur. About the flow, we control it with the comb node, so with another node, that is the comb node, and we can select it here. But of course, if we see that if we turn it on, nothing is happening. This is because it's needing some information in the second input. So in the second input, we are going to connect another import node, both in the comb and in the grow node. And in this import, we are going to need to connect a groom guides, some groom guides. But of course, we don't actually have some groom guides, so we need to create them. So we select the model and we just create groom on mesh. And if we go in the tool setting of Maya, by selecting edit groom, a lot of buttons are going to appear here. So with the plus we can add like some hair, but of course for now they're appearing in the vertex point of the mesh. Sometimes it's useful to do that, but in this case we don't want that because we don't want so many. So in strands we just uncheck create a mesh vertices, and we create. Now we are able to create them in the place where we want. But of course we want to work on symmetry to speed up the process. So we just select mirror axis, we select X, and now we can see that we are using mirror. So I would like to set an initial strength length of these guides we are creating with a bit more length, so we are going to match the reference of the monkey. So I think this length is fine, so we can just delete the other one with minus and add some curves. We don't want to add so many curves in this first step, so we are going to have more control in shaping them and doing quick change. Later, when we develop the groom, we can of course add more density of guides to add more flow variation and details. So after I create this first pass of curves, we can, with the comb tool, we can just comb them in the direction that we want. And for now we really need just a quick pass. Nice things to mention is that if you click then conform new strand after you have a first set of curves, every of new curves that you're going to create is going to have a similar shape to the previous one. And of course, if you see that there is one that is going behind the mesh, you just elevate them with this tool. These curves are a bit too long, I think, so we can just scale them. And to scale them, we just use the transform tool and we set a negative value in the strength and we just scale them down. So now it's time to connect the guide curves we created in the graph, but actually first rename it with the proper name, so body groom. And to connect them, we need first to select the Yeti node, and in graph input grooms, we are going to add this groom, right? We are going to have it here. And in the import node, after it's connected, it's going to appear in this list. So we select it. And if we now just show again the Yeti node, we're going to see that the curves have the same flow of the guides that we created, but as well the same length. So in the grow node is taking the information of the length of the guides, and the comb node is taking the information of the flow, of the direction and curvature of the curves. So that's great. But of course we still need a lot of more details to make this fair look realistic. So the following nodes we want to create after the comb is the Clumping node. The Clumping node is going to add clamps to our groom, but let's check some reference to better understand this node. We can see that in the whole body groom there are these big groups of hair, but as well here in the Moac we can see that there are these nice big groups of clamps. These ones are bigger clamps, but if we see inside these bigger clamps we can see a line of thinner and smaller clamps. Here the fur is a bit fuzzy and scraggly, so we can check them properly, but you can see a bit of this line inside here, and probably a bit more here inside. You see like all these little clamps. So we can already understand that there are different line of clamps. There are bigger clamps and smaller clamp inside them, so we need to recreate that on Yeti. So in Maya just changed the display color of the fur, so it's going to be more visible in the viewport. But let's see now how works the Clumping node. So we duplicate this bunch of nodes and we connect the last one in the second input of the Clumping node, and we quickly set the density of this line to a lower value, like this. We activate the Clumping node, and by setting clamp selection to always, we can see that something is happening. In the moment we set the base attraction to a lower value, we can see that we have clamps. But how these clamps are generated, it's quite simple. So we have these curves here in the upper line of nodes that are going to be attracted in the curves of this lower line of nodes. So for example, we see for each one of these curves, if we activate the clamping one, it's going to appear a clamp. So again, for example, here we have these three curves. We turn on the clamp and we are going to see that we have three big clamps. So that means that if we change the density of the scatter node, we're going to have a lower amount and bigger clamps if we set a density multiplier with a lower value. But if we push the density multiplier, we can see that we are going to have a high amount of clamps, and these are going to be smaller. So for now we want to create the bigger clamps, so we can set them to this value, maybe just a bit less. Okay. And in the clamping node, here we have some parameters to play with, like for example the base attraction, to control the attraction of the base, and also the attraction bias. The attraction bias controls where the base or tip attraction enter in the game, so control and affect the clamping. So I usually set to like 0.8. And here we have a nice first pass of clamps. Now let's create the inner smaller clamps inside these big clamps. To do that is really easy. We just need to duplicate this line of nodes again. And we also want another clamping node. And we are going to just do some new connection. So we are going to have this line of curves that are going to be attracted in these curves, that are going to be attracted in these lower curves. So if for example we check what's happening here, we can see that we are going to need a bigger amount of density to create these smaller clamps. So for each one of these little curves that is already clamped in this one, in this lower one, we're going to have a smaller clamp. So if we check this one here, and we can stress a bit the base attraction, so pushing, we can see that we have little clumps inside these bigger clumps. It's good to mention also that it's better to check this lock density value. That's because when you're going to render, this scatter value, the density multiplier, is going to be multiplied by the render density, so per 10. And of course you don't want that the number of clumps in these lower streams of nodes is affected. So for this reason we set lock density so the number is going to be the same. So we can actually set the scatter node of the first line with a lower value, let's say like 70, and we can push a bit the viewport density. So we are going to have the right amount of preview. And here in the scatter node, probably we can set a lower value, let's see, to have these bigger clumps inside the bigger one. And here probably we can even push them and set them like to a lower value. So we're going to have even more bigger clumps. Nice. So now we have a first pass of clumps, but we can see that something is missing, like some organic touch to the fur style. For now the fur is looking like if it's wet, the clumps are really stressed. So to fix that we are going to need the help of another node, the Scraggle node. And the Scraggle node just does what it says. He adds Scraggle to the curves. So if we set the Scraggle frequency to a lower value and push the Scraggle power, we can see that we're going to have these nice effects. If we push the Scraggle frequency to another value, we are going to need to add more resolution in the curves, because we are going to need more resolution to create these little curves. But be careful, because if you're adding too much resolution in the final lines of hair, the one that we are going to export in Unreal, so in this case, in this number, the performance are going to be much lower, because it's just adding, you know, resolution to each single hair multiplied for all the hair that are there. So be careful about that. Here we can set like a lower value of 20, and we can see what does the Scraggle to this in this lower line of clumps. So for example, if we activate it now, of course it's way too much, but if we set the frequency to a lower value and we just soften the effects, we can see that the big clumps, so the big shapes, are getting a nice, you know, little variation. Of course we want to go really gentle with it at this lower stage of the clumps, and we can just deactivate the node to check, you know, its effects. I think it's fine. So now we want to do the same in the other clump line, and we are going to set the Scraggle node after the clumping. And if we push it, we can see that what's affecting now are the little clumps inside the bigger one. So here we want also like softer effects. We can already again deactivate the node to see what's happening. So now we are going to duplicate the Scraggle node again, and we are going to set it at the end of this top line of nodes, the one that we are going to render. And if we activate, we can see already how it's affecting the clumps. The clumping are looking much more realistic. So we can play with it a bit. We can like push just a bit down, and even the frequency can be a bit lower. And what we used to do in our workflow is to create two Scraggle nodes. So one is going to just affect all the overall fur and add a nice variation and cut the linearity of the hair. And another one instead is going to create some crazy hair flying all over. We're going to activate it. And of course we don't want all the hair going crazy, but just a few percentage. So for this reason we go in the percentage attribute and we set it down. So if for example now we set it like this and we turn on and off the nodes, we can see that only few hair are going to be affected by this Scraggle. This is really useful to create this nice effect. So let's play a bit now that we have this set up with the clamping, and we can set the base attraction like to a lower value, as well this one. Another tips for the clamping node is that in the geometry tab, it's better to set left handling to conform if longer. In this way, we are going to have a better behavior of the clamp following the subcurves of the other stream of nodes. Let's improve now the fur in the neck area. As we can see here, the fur has a nice flow and also a different length from the rest of the body. So let's work on that. So we can see here that if we select the guides, we can see that a lot of guides are missing here. So it's better if we add some. So we click Edit Groom, and we just add a few curves. As we can see in the neck area, we also have bigger clamps like in the rest of the body. But I think in this area we don't want big clamps, so let's see how we can fix that. What we can do is that in the clamping node, we can set in the weight parameter a texture that will control where we want clamp or not. So if we are going to paint black, we are not going to have clamp. If we paint gray, we are going to have a few amount of clamp. This is the texture I painted for it. As we can see, he has a white amount in the lower part of the body, and the neck area has a darker gray. So that means that we are going to have a full amount of clamps in the lower area and a less pronounced clamp effect in the neck area. Back in Maya, we can duplicate a texture node and set the name of the texture we want to use. And we also name it correctly. Perfect. After that, we connect it in this, we want to use it in this clamping node, so we just drop it here and we set weight. And let's see what happens. Now, as you can see, there are not any more big clamps in this area. There are just the smaller ones that are driven by this line of nodes. So that's closer to the reference. Another detail we can add in our Groom setup are the flyaways. The flyaways are basically those random hair that go out of the shape and enrich the silhouette. To create them is really easy. We usually create another line of nodes over the main setup that we did. So let's see how we do that. We just duplicate these nodes, and we also take this scraggle one and we set them here. We preview, and of course we don't want such amount of flyaways. We set a lower amount of density. And I think we can also push a bit the main scraggle and probably push down the frequency. And now something that we can do is just to merge the two streams of nodes. And for doing that, we need the merge node. So in the merge node is going just to merge these two lines. And the moment we are going to activate the node, we can see what's happening. So we go from here, and there are these flyaways. Of course, for now these flyaways are not visible because they have the same length of this Groom. So how we scale them? Really easy. We just need to create a transform node, and inside it we set it to element, and here we can scale it up. So you see, the fur now is going over. We can also add a shader node, so we can highlight, as you can see, the flyaways with a different color, so we can preview them better. Let's try to scale them a bit up, and probably we can also add a bit more density. Nice one. The next node we are going to create is going to be the width. The width is going to control the thickness of the fur. Be careful that this node is good if you are planning to render with Arnold. But as we are going to send the Groom in Unreal, Unreal has its own way to control the thickness, as we are going to see later. But for now it's good to set a right amount of thickness of the fur, just for preview purpose. So the tip width of course is going to be less than the base width. And with the base parameter we can control where the base is going to control over the tip. So in this case, at the 80% of the fur, the base width is going to take control, and then the rest part is going to be controlled by the tip one. And then with the width multiplier we can just scale them all. Now that we have a nice groom setup for the body fur, we can tweak some parameters to get closer to the reference and later send all the groom work to Unreal 5. As we change the width, it would be nice to check the proper density of the work. So we set the viewport density to 10, that is like the full amount of density. And we can see that the density is working nice. Probably we can tweak now some setting in the clamping node. We can lower the base attraction, and as well in the other clamping node we can lower also here. Nice. Maybe we can push a bit the attraction bias of the big clamp, and let's see, it's working nice. We can also add a bit of more density to the flyaways, and probably also add a bit of percentage to the scraggly long fur, just to break a bit more the shapes of the big clamps. As well, we can create another scraggle node with crazy hair in the clamp 01 line, the line of clamp that deal with the smaller clamps. Let's see its effects. Yes, if you see, it's adding some flying clamps that break the main shape. Really nice. So let's check the work all together. And probably we can just add a bit of more density in the main density multiplier of the scatter node. And I think we are ready to export the Groom in Unreal. So don't miss the next episode, where we will show you our new workflow between Yeti and UE5. Do you want to know more about grooming? Check our new course.
This course will start from the basics of grooming and dive in more advanced techniques, giving you the right tools to build your portfolio and start your career as grooming artist.
We joined lots of cool projects during this year, from big blockbuster movies to TV commercial, where we develop a solid workflow that is easily adaptable to different kinds of grooms.
In the chapter 1, we will focus on the basics of Yeti, introducing the tools and techniques we'll need to build amazing grooms. In the chapter 2, we'll groom a realistic animal fur and dive in the grooming workflow we use in our professional works.
You will get everything you need for the course, including models and lighting sim. Also, you will have access to a private channel in our Discord Antepost Lab, where you can share your work and get feedback from us.
So, let's get started! We can't wait to share our experience with you and dive in the magic world of grooming.